No one noticed the man behind the luxury suit, the millionaire who had it all. But inside he was broken. Until she stepped in, and nothing would ever be the same. Hello beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel. The place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again. Because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. Leonard sat in the corner of the small, bustling cafe. A place he had visited countless times but never truly belonged. The soft hum of espresso machines, the clink of cups, and the low chatter of strangers created a world he felt completely detached from. Outside, New York shimmered with life, but inside Leonard felt invisible even to himself. He toyed with the silver pen on the table, rolling it between his fingers, tracing invisible patterns on the napkin, lost in a fog of memories. Every sip of the now lukewarm espresso felt heavy, as if the cup itself carried the weight of the divorce that had ripped his life apart. He looked around, half hoping for distraction, half wishing no one would disturb his solitude. No one approached. Not because they didn't notice him, but because they sensed something unapproachable in his silence. The kind of loneliness that money couldn't buy away. Leonard had everything the world could admire. A thriving empire, an impressive title, a life of luxury. But he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. Love that felt safe, simple, and real. Across the cafe, Michelle moved with quiet precision, balancing trays, refilling sugar jars, and offering her practiced smiles to customers. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, strands falling over her forehead as she darted from table to table. She had long grown accustomed to the monotony of service work, the small victories of a grateful tip or a customer's smile. Yet tonight, something about a man in a sharp suit, slouched in the corner with eyes that seemed to carry entire lifetimes of sorrow, made her pause. She watched him fidget, fingers tapping on the edge of the table, a sigh escaping his lips that was almost a whisper. His watch caught the light, glinting, a reminder of the wealth he carried so effortlessly. Yet it failed to hide the emptiness in his gaze. Michelle felt a flutter of curiosity, an almost instinctual pull toward the quiet storm that surrounded him. She wondered, briefly, what story lay behind that stillness, that barely contained ache. Leonard dropped a napkin, but he didn't notice. Michelle stepped forward without thinking, picking it up and smoothing the crumpled paper. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no conversation, no words spoken, just an unspoken recognition of something missing in both of them. He was a man who had lost his way. She was a woman who quietly healed the unnoticed wounds of others. And in that brief intersection, a spark formed. Leonard's lips pressed into a tight line, a mix of surprise and something unspoken tugging at the corner of his consciousness. Michelle offered a polite nod, her heart beating faster than she expected, as though she had stepped into a story already unfolding, one she hadn't yet understood but somehow wanted to be a part of. Outside, the city lights flickered in rhythm with the pulse of the cafe. Inside, the quiet moment between them held a gravity neither could yet name. A sense that this encounter, brief as it was, might change everything. The next morning, Leonard returned to the cafe, though he told himself it was for the espresso, not for any fleeting curiosity about the waitress who had caught his attention. The city had not slowed down overnight. The streets buzzed with urgency, horns blaring, the scent of fresh bread from corner bakeries mingling with exhaust fumes. Leonard moved through it all like a ghost, detached, as though the world's chaos belonged to someone else. Michelle was already there, setting out freshly baked pastries, her apron dusted lightly with flour. The cafe had just begun to fill with the usual crowd, businesspeople grabbing quick coffees, students with laptops perched on tiny tables. But her eyes kept wandering to him. She didn't know why. Something about him tugged at her, a mix of sorrow and intensity that demanded acknowledgement. When Leonard finally sat down, she approached, careful not to reveal the nervous energy that surged through her. "Good morning, sir." "The usual?" she asked, her voice calm, professional, but with an undercurrent of something softer, almost hesitant. He looked up at her, startled by the recognition, but nodded. "Yes, thank you." His voice was low, carrying a weight that seemed older than his years. He didn't look at her directly, instead tracing the rim of the cup with his finger, as if tracing invisible scars on the world. As she set the cup in front of him, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. A young man rushed in, nearly colliding with a barista, shouting about a delivery gone wrong. In the chaos, a tray slipped from a waiter's hands, sending a cascade of steaming coffee and pastries across the floor. Leonard instinctively moved forward, reflexes sharp despite the quiet torment in his soul. Without thinking, he steadied the tray just as Michelle lunged to prevent the falling cups from shattering. Their hands collided, and time seemed to freeze. Leonard looked down at her, really looked, her eyes wide, cheeks flushed, a mixture of fear and determination. And for a moment, the world around them blurred. I'm sorry," Michelle stammered, pulling back slightly, though neither moved from the collision point. Leonard shook his head, his fingers brushing hers as he did. "No, it's all right. You were quick." Her breath caught. You saved it too." The cafe fell back into motion, the noise returning, but the seconds they shared lingered. Leonard realized something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of being truly seen. Not for his wealth, not for the empire he commanded, but for the man hiding behind it all. The man who feared vulnerability yet longed for connection. Michelle, in turn, felt something shift in her chest. She had helped many people, but none had struck her the way this quiet, reserved man did. There was sorrow there, yes, but also a fragility that seemed to beg for someone to understand it. Her instinct told her he didn't ask for help often, if ever. And yet somehow, he allowed her to be the one to notice. Leonard finally spoke, his voice barely above the hum of the cafe. "You have a way of noticing things others overlook." Michelle smiled, nervously tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I see people. That's all." But it was not all. In that moment, an invisible thread tied them together. A spark ignited, a subtle, almost imperceptible electricity that neither could explain yet both felt. And for Leonard, whose life had been a careful arrangement of control, wealth, and distance, it was terrifying. And exhilarating. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. But inside the cafe, a small, quiet revolution had begun. A collision of loneliness and empathy that would change both of them in ways neither could yet imagine. And for the first time in months, Leonard allowed himself a thought he had not dared in years. Maybe someone could see him, truly see him, and maybe, just maybe, he could let someone in. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt seen by someone when you least expected it? Comment below. I want to hear your story. The cafe returned to its normal rhythm, but for Leonard, the world outside seemed muted, distant, as if all the noise existed just to highlight the emptiness he carried inside. He sat at his usual corner table, staring at the untouched espresso, trying to replay the incident from earlier in his mind. His mind raced. She saved the tray. She noticed me. Why did that matter? And with it came a surge of discomfort. Leonard was not a man used to relying on anyone, not even for acknowledgement. Pride had been his armor for years, and vulnerability was a dangerous stranger. He thought about leaving, about retreating back into the safety of his empty apartment, and walls that required no explanations, no emotions, no judgment. And yet, he found himself lingering. Something in Michelle's presence had unsettled him. Not in a way that angered or frightened, but in a way that made him painfully aware of his own isolation. Meanwhile, Michelle busied herself at the counter, but her thoughts kept drifting to Leonard. She had always been able to read people. The anxious regulars, the hurried businessmen, the lonely students typing away at laptops, but there was something different about him. He wasn't just another lost soul passing through the cafe. He carried a weight, a history, a sorrow that radiated from him even in silence. She wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but a quiet, stubborn hesitation held her back. What if she misread it? What if the man who seemed so fragile was also too proud to accept kindness? Leonard left the cafe abruptly that day, the door closing with a soft jingle behind him, leaving Michelle staring after him, an ache forming in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, a passing curiosity, but deep down she knew otherwise. She felt a rare stir of hope and fear entwined, a recognition that the man, so closed off, so untouchable, had left an unexpected mark on her. The next few days followed the same pattern. Leonard would come, sit, order, and withdraw into himself. Michelle would watch, sometimes daring a small smile, sometimes hesitating to speak at all. The small sparks that had ignited during the tray incident flared in their silent glances, but were quickly smothered by pride, fear, and routine. One afternoon, Leonard's phone rang insistently. He glanced at it. A reminder from his lawyer about the impending finalization of his divorce. His chest tightened. The isolation that had always hovered around him now pressed down like a physical weight. He wanted to confide, to speak about the grief that gnawed at him daily, but the words would not come. He realized he had forgotten how to ask for comfort, how to let someone see the fractures in his carefully constructed life. Across the room, Michelle noticed his tension. She wanted to approach him, to offer something, a smile, a kind word, even just the awareness that someone cared. But something in her stomach told her to wait. The man before her was like a lion in a cage, majestic, strong, yet vulnerable. To push too hard might scare him away. She kept busy, but her eyes kept drifting, tracing the curve of his jaw, the furrow in his brow, the subtle trembling of his hands as he fumbled with a napkin. That evening, Leonard finally spoke, not to Michelle, not to anyone in the cafe, but to the empty space across from him. Why does it always feel like I'm the only one who's watching the world instead of living in it? His voice was barely audible, but in it lay the raw ache of years of solitude. Michelle heard it, though she wasn't sure if he had spoken to her or to the universe itself. She paused mid-step, her hand frozen on the counter. A pang of empathy surged through her. She wanted to say something, to offer him a lifeline, but instead she settled for a quiet observation, hoping he would notice the concern in her gaze. Days turned into a week, and the resistance continued. Leonard's pride told him to remain distant, to protect himself from the vulnerability that Michelle seemed to evoke without even trying. He was terrified that acknowledging his need for connection might make him weak, unworthy of the life he had built. Michelle, on the other hand, wrestled with the pull of her instincts, her heart urging her to bridge the gap, her mind cautioning her against intrusion. And yet, each small interaction, each shared glance, each accidental brush of hands, added weight to an invisible thread. It pulled at them, subtle but unrelenting, binding them together despite their conscious efforts to resist. Both were caught in the delicate tension of desire and fear, recognition and denial. They were drawn to one another, but the barriers of pride, shame, and uncertainty kept them apart. It was a slow burn, a quiet tension that simmered beneath the surface, punctuated by moments that made the heart ache. Leonard hesitating to ask for a refill, Michelle nearly speaking and then holding her tongue, each silently longing for the other to break the wall between them. And in that delicate push and pull, the story of two lonely hearts began to unfold. Not yet together, but inextricably linked, each unable to fully ignore the other, each resisting the inevitable spark that had already been ignited. Speech balloon. Have you ever been drawn to someone but felt too afraid to take the first step? Comment below. I want to know your story. The day had begun like any other, the city streets crowded with honking taxis, cyclists weaving through traffic, and the aroma of fresh coffee drifting from corner cafes. Leonard walked into his office building, briefcase in hand, the weight of the morning pressing down on him like a tangible force. His assistant greeted him with a perfunctory nod, handing over the morning schedule. But Leonard's mind was elsewhere. The memory of Michelle, her eyes, the subtle tremble of her hands during the tray incident, the faint kindness in her smile, refused to leave him. He barely noticed the email alert on his phone until the subject line caught his eye. Emergency, office generator failure, immediate assistance needed. Leonard frowned. The building's backup power system had failed overnight, and the entire top floors were at risk of being without electricity. The company's most critical clients were on conference calls, and any disruption could cost millions. He sighed. irritation threading through his exhaustion, and called the maintenance department. Meanwhile, across town, Michelle had just finished a shift at the cafe. She wiped her hands on her apron, ready for a brief break before her evening classes, when her manager rushed over. Michelle. The cafe next door had a power outage. They're short-staffed and need help immediately. Can you go? Michelle hesitated. She was tired, yes, but something in her chest nudged her forward. A little voice whispered that her day wasn't over yet, that fate had more in store. She grabbed her coat and hurried toward the neighboring building. Fate, as it turned out, had a sense of timing. Leonard, descending to the lobby to check on the emergency, collided with a chaotic scene. The generator had indeed failed, and the upper floors were already in partial darkness. Panic flickered across the faces of staff and clients alike. In the midst of it all, Leonard spotted a familiar figure threading through the crowd, Michelle, carrying a tray of supplies for the maintenance team. Their eyes met across the chaos, and for a heartbeat, Leonard felt a mix of disbelief and relief. "You're here," he muttered under his breath, a trace of awe in his tone. Michelle approached cautiously. "I came to help," she said, her voice steady despite the tension surrounding them. "It's a mess up there." Leonard hesitated, torn between pride and gratitude. "I thank you. It's more complicated than anyone imagined." He paused, unsure if he should allow himself to reveal how grateful he truly was. Vulnerability had always been dangerous territory, and yet here it was, demanding to be acknowledged. The two of them moved toward the service elevator together. The confined space of the elevator, the humming machinery, the dim emergency lights, forced a closeness that neither could escape. Leonard felt the warmth radiating from Michelle, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the metallic tang of the elevator. He wanted to speak, to bridge the distance that had grown between them, but the words lodged in his throat. Michelle, sensing his tension, offered a quiet smile, letting him know that no words were required yet. By the time they reached the top floor, the emergency had worsened. A crucial client system was offline, servers threatened by overheating, and Leonard had to coordinate technicians while ensuring clients remained calm. Normally, he would have tackled the chaos alone, barking orders with practiced efficiency. But today, Michelle's presence was grounding, calming the storm inside him. She moved with quiet competence, assisting staff, offering guidance, and anticipating needs before anyone asked. Leonard found himself watching her, struck not only by her skill but by the care she poured into every action. Hours passed, tension mounting with every flickering light and shouted instruction. And yet, in the midst of it all, the distance between them began to shrink. Not through words, but through shared purpose, through moments of mutual reliance that demanded trust. Leonard caught himself stealing glances at Michelle when he thought she wasn't looking, noting the determination etched across her face, the subtle gestures that revealed both strength and compassion. She, in turn, noticed the slight slump of his shoulders, the lines etched by sleepless nights, the fleeting expressions that betrayed the weight he carried. At one point, a technician dropped a heavy tool, sending it clattering across the floor. Leonard and Michelle moved instinctively at the same time, their hands brushing as they grabbed it simultaneously. The brief touch sent a shiver through both of them, a reminder of the spark that had been smoldering since the tray incident. Leonard swallowed hard, heart pounding, aware that every glance, every proximity, was slowly dismantling the walls he had spent decades building. By the time the emergency was under control, the office had settled into a tense calm. The lights flickered back to life, servers hummed steadily, and clients were none the wiser about how close disaster had come. Leonard finally exhaled, a mixture of relief and exhaustion, and turned to Michelle. I don't know how to thank you. Truly." Michelle shrugged lightly, though her eyes softened. "You'd have done the same for me, I think." Leonard smiled faintly, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Maybe," he admitted, though inside he knew it was different this time. Something about sharing the chaos with her, navigating it side by side, had shifted something irrevocably. For Michelle, the sense of connection was undeniable. In the confined spaces, in the shared stress, in the unspoken reliance, she felt a closeness that went beyond mere chance. Leonard was no longer the untouchable billionaire she had observed from afar. He was a man who could be vulnerable, who could need help, who could perhaps let someone in. And Leonard realized that despite his pride, despite the careful distance he had maintained, he didn't want to let her go. Not now, not ever. The elevator ride down later was quiet, but the silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It was heavy with possibility. The city lights outside shimmered as if reflecting the slow ignition of something neither of them could yet name, but both could feel. A shared glance, a faint, knowing smile, and the unspoken truth settled between them. The walls of resistance were cracking. Speech balloon. Have you ever been forced to work alongside someone and realized you couldn't ignore the pull between you? Comment below. I want to know your story. The cafe was quieter than usual that evening, the golden glow of the setting sun spilling across the worn wooden floorboards. Leonard sat alone at his corner table, staring at the half-empty cup of espresso in front of him. His thoughts were a tangle of regrets, memories, and what-ifs. The chaos of the office emergency still lingered in his mind. The adrenaline, the proximity to Michelle, the shared moments that had shaken something deep within him. He realized he hadn't felt this alive, or this vulnerable, in years. And that realization terrified him. Michelle had just finished her shift and lingered by the counter, cleaning tables slowly, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Leonard. She wanted to speak to him, to break through the wall of reserve he seemed to carry so effortlessly. But she sensed the weight pressing down on him. The invisible armor that he had wrapped around himself after years of heartbreak. She decided to wait. Sometimes patience was the only way to reach a guarded soul. Finally, Leonard spoke, his voice low and hesitant. Do you ever feel like life just keeps piling on, no matter how much you think you can handle it? Michelle paused, leaning against the counter, her hands folded in front of her. Yes, she said softly. But sometimes, that's when we find out who we really are. He looked up at her then, eyes shadowed with memory and pain. I used to believe that too. Before everything changed. Michelle's curiosity surged, but she remained silent, letting him take the lead. Leonard's jaw tightened as he continued. I had a life, a family, a marriage I thought would last forever. I believed in it. I invested everything. My heart, my time, my trust. And one day it just vanished. My wife left, taking our life with her, leaving only silence behind. I was left with the pieces, and for a long time, I didn't know how to put them together again. He stared at the table, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the rim of his cup. I convinced myself I was strong, that I could handle it. But strength doesn't stop the nights when the bed feels too big, or the mornings when the sunlight reminds you of everything you've lost. I've built walls to survive, but they're lonely walls. Michelle's eyes softened, her chest tightening with empathy. She took a careful step toward him, though she didn't touch him. You don't have to face it alone, she said gently. Even the strongest walls can let someone in if you allow them. Leonard looked up, meeting her gaze. For a brief moment, the guard he had maintained for so long faltered. He wanted to tell her everything. His regrets, his fears, the nights spent staring at a cold ceiling wondering if he deserved happiness again. But the words stuck in his throat. Vulnerability had always been dangerous. It still was. And yet, something about Michelle made him consider taking the risk. Meanwhile, Michelle's past lingered behind her gentle demeanor. Years ago, she had been engaged to a man she thought she would marry. He had promised the world love, stability, a future, and then disappeared without explanation. The heartbreak had hardened her, made her cautious, but it hadn't extinguished her capacity to care. She had learned to offer kindness without expecting reciprocation, to save herself from disappointment. And yet, Leonard's quiet, unspoken sorrow stirred something in her that she hadn't felt in years. A longing to protect, to nurture, to reach across the chasm of pain that separated them. As Leonard spoke, he began to reveal small details of his past, moments of failure at work, the emptiness of dinners alone, the gnawing doubt that he had somehow caused the collapse of his marriage. Michelle listened, offering soft nods, allowing him to unburden without judgment. Each confession chipped away at the distance between them. By the time Leonard paused, the cafe was nearly empty, save for a few lingering patrons. The silence between them was heavy, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was charged, electric with shared vulnerability. For the first time in months, Leonard felt seen. Not for his wealth, not for his accomplishments, but for the man beneath it all. Michelle, too, felt a shift within herself. She realized that the empathy she had offered wasn't just a reflex, it was an investment of her heart. And with Leonard, that investment didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a chance to connect, to heal, and perhaps even to hope again. "Thank you," Leonard whispered almost to himself. "For listening, for noticing. For not turning away." Michelle smiled softly, her eyes glistening with the faintest shimmer of tears. "I never turn away from someone who matters," she replied. And in that quiet, sunlit cafe, the invisible threads that had pulled them together in moments of chaos and chance were strengthened by understanding. Past wounds had been revealed, old scars laid bare, and yet, in the exposure, there was a fragile beauty, a shared recognition that pain could be a bridge, not just a barrier. It was a turning point. The walls of resistance that had defined Leonard's life were beginning to crumble. And Michelle, having faced her own fears of heartbreak, realized that some connections were worth risking everything for. Speech balloon. Have you ever discovered someone's pain and felt an urge to reach them anyway? Comment below. I want to hear your story. The cafe had quieted to a gentle hum that evening, the soft glow of pendant lights reflecting off the polished tables. Leonard sat in his corner as usual, but tonight, he did not stare blankly at his coffee. Instead, his gaze lingered on Michelle, who moved through the tables with quiet ease, her laughter soft and unassuming as she joked with a regular customer. The sound was like a balm to him, each note washing over the years of isolation he had carried, little by little. He hadn't intended to stay for long, but something kept him rooted, a magnetic pull that had little to do with the coffee or the quiet comfort of the cafe. It had everything to do with her. The way she noticed the small things, the way she listened without judgment, the way she moved as though she cared deeply about a world that often ignored the quiet ones. Michelle, too, felt the weight of the evening in a way she had not expected. The cafe was closing soon, and most of the staff had left, leaving only a few tables to clean. She glanced toward Leonard, who had been unusually quiet, a subtle tension in his posture that she recognized instantly. Something in her chest urged her to reach out, to bridge the space that still existed between them. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "You seemed quieter than usual," she said softly, leaning against the edge of the counter. Her eyes, warm and inviting, met his. Leonard let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. "I guess I'm just thinking," he replied, his voice low. He hesitated, then added, almost as if confessing to the night itself, "Thinking about how easy it is to hide behind walls. How much safer it feels to be alone." Michelle tilted her head slightly, studying him. "It may feel safer, but it's lonely," she said gently. "You can hide from the world, but not from yourself." Her words struck him in a way he had not anticipated. He had always believed that solitude was protection. Yet hearing her speak with such calm insight made him realize how empty it had been. He wanted to respond, to admit the ache in his chest, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he allowed himself a small, tentative smile, a gesture of trust, of willingness to let someone see him just a little. Encouraged, Michelle pulled out a chair and sat across from him, a subtle defiance of her own caution. "You don't have to explain," she said. "But if you want to, I'll listen." Leonard's fingers drummed lightly against the cup before him. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was laden with possibility. "It's difficult," he admitted finally, "to let someone in after losing so much. I've spent years convincing myself that I don't need anyone. But," he paused, swallowing hard, "sometimes I wonder if that was just fear talking." Michelle leaned in slightly, her gaze steady. "Fear is powerful," she said softly, "but it doesn't have to rule you forever." The two sat in silence, the world outside fading into a soft blur. It was in that quiet space that they began to share fragments of themselves. Not the polished, guarded versions presented to the world, but the raw, unedited pieces that most people never see. Leonard spoke of sleepless nights filled with regret, of dinners eaten alone, of the small moments where he felt invisible even in a room full of people. Michelle shared stories of heartbreak and disappointment, of trust broken and lessons learned. of the strength it took to keep believing in kindness. As they spoke, the distance between them shrank. Every glance, every tentative smile, every shared laugh chipped away at the walls that had kept them apart. Leonard felt a warmth he had not known in years. The fragile comfort of being understood, the tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, he could allow himself to care again. Michelle, for her part, felt her own heart stirring. She had always approached people with caution, but Leonard's quiet vulnerability drew her in. She sensed that beneath his armor, beneath the wealth and prestige, was a man capable of profound tenderness, someone who could, with time and trust, love deeply and wholly. At one point, Leonard reached for the napkin on the table, and Michelle's hand brushed his. Neither pulled away. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant. Yet it carried with it the weight of unspoken understanding. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The connection between them, fragile but real, was undeniable. As the cafe lights dimmed and the last customers left, Leonard realized he no longer wanted to be alone. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long time he felt a quiet certainty. With Michelle he could begin to heal. Michelle, watching him, felt it too. The spark that had begun in fleeting glances and near accidents had evolved into something deeper. She could see it in his eyes, the guarded vulnerability, the tentative trust, the flicker of hope. And in that shared silence, she allowed herself to hope as well. For a brief, perfect moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and Leonard and Michelle existed in a bubble of possibility, of connection, of unspoken promise. And neither wanted to let it go. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt a connection so fragile yet so real that it changed everything? Comment below. I want to hear your story. The morning sun filtered through the cafe windows, but the light did nothing to warm Leonard's heart. He sat in his usual corner, fingers drumming restlessly against his coffee cup. The calm and fragile trust he had begun to build with Michelle over the past weeks felt like a distant memory. Fragile threads fraying before his eyes. The day had begun with an unexpected visitor, one of Leonard's former business partners, someone who had always kept tabs on his personal life under the guise of concern. The man arrived at the cafe without notice, and the conversation that followed was sharp, unnerving, and public. Leonard, caught off guard, was forced to defend not just his business decisions but his very character. Words were thrown carelessly, insinuations slipped like knives, and Leonard felt the blood drain from his face. He had endured attacks before, but today they carried an unspoken accusation, weakness. Michelle noticed immediately. She approached his table, concern etched across her face. "Leonard, what's going on?" she asked softly. It's nothing," Leonard muttered, voice tight, teeth clenched. Pride and embarrassment warred within him. He wanted to protect her from the chaos he had tried to shield himself from for years. "Really? Don't worry about it." But Michelle could see the tremor in his hands, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle ache in his eyes that screamed otherwise. Before she could say more, Leonard's former partner leaned in, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Funny how some people try to hide behind money, but even wealth can't mask weakness. Leonard's chest tightened, a mixture of anger, shame, and helplessness surging at once. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words that came out were harsher than intended. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped, voice rising, drawing the attention of other customers. Michelle flinched, caught between wanting to defend him and fearing the intensity of his anger. Leonard's sudden outburst, fueled by years of repressed frustration, shocked her. She had seen glimpses of his pride, his pain, but this sharp, public display was different. It was as if the man she had begun to know was cracking under pressure. In that instant, Leonard realized what he had done. He had allowed his fear, his frustration, and his anger to spill over. And Michelle, the one person he had begun to trust, now seemed startled, even distant. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the words stuck. Pride, stubbornness, and fear of vulnerability coiled tightly in his chest. I'm sorry," he said finally, but it was hollow, defensive, and too late. Michelle's eyes, once soft and inviting, were now filled with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "It's okay," she said quietly, though her voice betrayed the ache beneath her calm. She retreated to the counter, leaving Leonard alone in the corner, the weight of what he had almost had slipping through his fingers. The next hours were heavy with silence. Leonard tried to focus on work, on calls, on emails, but every glance at Michelle across the cafe reminded him of the damage he had caused. He had let fear and pride dominate, shattering the fragile trust they had painstakingly built. For Michelle, the moment was equally devastating. She had begun to allow herself to hope, to imagine the possibility of connection, of healing, of love that might finally feel safe. And now, in a single outburst, that possibility seemed to dissolve. Her chest tightened with disappointment, and a familiar ache settled in her stomach. She had seen Leonard's vulnerability, felt the depth of his pain, and yet, in his anger, she was reminded of the walls he had fought to maintain, the pride that still held him prisoner. The cafe's chatter continued around them, oblivious to the storm that had erupted in their corner. Leonard felt the isolation crash back over him, heavier than before. He had touched hope and allowed himself a glimpse of intimacy, only to see it crumble under his own flaws. By the time the cafe closed, both Leonard and Michelle were left with the bitter taste of regret. Leonard walked out into the city streets, shoulders hunched, feeling the familiar ache of emptiness that had haunted him for so long. Michelle stayed behind, silently counting down the minutes until she could leave, her mind replaying Leonard's outburst, wondering if the bond they had shared had ever truly existed, or if it had all been a fleeting illusion. That night, Leonard lay in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his mistakes pressing on him. He realized that he had sabotaged the one connection that had dared to break through his armor. He had allowed fear, pride, and anger to dictate his actions, and now he was left alone with nothing but the echo of what could have been. Meanwhile, Michelle walked home under the city lights, her steps slow, reflective. She had cared deeply, and the pain of Leonard's outburst lingered like a shadow. She questioned whether hope was worth risking, whether opening oneself to someone like him, even someone so compelling, was ever safe. For both of them, the night felt endless. The spark that had ignited between them in shared chaos and understanding now seemed smothered by the weight of misunderstanding, anger, and pride. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface of their despair, the faintest ember of connection remained. A fragile thread that neither time nor distance could entirely sever. Speech balloon. Have you ever had someone push you away just when you were ready to trust them? Comment below. I want to hear your story. The city was quiet that evening, an unusual stillness settling over the streets. Leonard sat in his apartment, the soft hum of the air conditioning filling the spaces where conversation might have been. He stared at the darkened skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the view did nothing to soothe the storm inside him. The cafe, Michelle, the tray incident, the emergency at his office, they all swirled together in a torrent of memories and regrets. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight, heart heavy. The outburst at the cafe still haunted him. The sharp words, the sudden anger, the way he had shoved away the only person who had begun to see him truly. Pride, always pride, had sabotaged the fragile connection he had fought so hard to let grow. And now, as the silence pressed down around him, Leonard faced the truth he had long avoided. If he didn't act, he could lose her forever. Meanwhile, Michelle walked home under the fading streetlights, the night air cool against her skin. She thought about Leonard, the man she had begun to understand, to care for, even with all his walls and pride. His sudden outburst had left her shaken, unsure, but not indifferent. In the quiet of the evening, she realized that despite her fear, despite the disappointment, she wanted to know him. Not just the polished exterior, not just the billionaire persona, but the man beneath. She wanted to believe that connection was possible, that trust could be rebuilt. Both were alone, each wrestling with the same truth. The bond they had nurtured was fragile, and yet it mattered more than either had dared to admit. Leonard considered sending a message, calling, visiting the cafe, but hesitation held him back. What if she rejected him? What if pride and fear had left permanent scars? Michelle, too, considered her options. She could wait, maintain her distance, protect herself from further hurt. Or she could take the risk, reach out, and hope Leonard was willing to meet her halfway. The thought of silence between them felt unbearable, a void she wasn't willing to accept. Hours passed. Leonard finally picked up his phone, thumb hovering over her contact. Memories of the past weeks, The tray incident, the office emergency, the moments of shared vulnerability, flooded his mind. He thought of her eyes, her gentle voice, the quiet reassurance she had offered him without judgment. And for the first time in weeks, he let his fear yield to courage. He typed a simple message. "Can we talk? I need to make things right." Michelle's phone vibrated in her hand. Her heart raced. She read the message once, twice, then smiled softly, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She typed back almost immediately. "Yes. Let's meet." They chose a small park near the cafe, the place where city noise softened and the world seemed to hold its breath. Leonard arrived first, pacing lightly, anxiety mingling with anticipation. When Michelle appeared, her presence calmed him instantly, the quiet strength she exuded grounding him, reminding him that connection, even after fear and pride, was possible. They sat on a worn wooden bench, the air around them still and expectant. Leonard spoke first, voice low but earnest. "Michelle, I ruined what we had. I let my anger, my pride, my fear get in the way of something real. And He stopped, words faltering under the weight of sincerity. "I don't want to lose you." Michelle's eyes softened, reflecting the same vulnerability he carried. "Leonard, I was hurt, confused, but I also saw who you really are. And I don't want to lose you either. I just needed to know that you could see me, that you could trust me." They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming faintly around them. Slowly, carefully, Leonard reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The touch was tentative, a bridge being rebuilt, and yet it carried the weight of everything they had experienced. Fear, vulnerability, hope, and the fragile beginnings of love. "I don't have all the answers," Leonard said quietly, "but I want to try. With you." Michelle's grip tightened slightly, a silent affirmation. "I want that too. But we have to be honest. We have to let each other in, even when it's scary." And in that quiet park, under the soft glow of the streetlights, they made a choice. To risk vulnerability, to embrace the possibility of connection, to let go of pride and fear, and to begin again. It was not a moment of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was a decision, deliberate and real, forged in honesty and mutual recognition. As they walked back toward the cafe together, hands intertwined, both felt the quiet thrill of hope, the sense that after all the walls and mistakes, love could finally take root. The shatter point had passed. They had faced it, and now, the choice to heal and grow together had been made. Speech balloon. Have you ever had to make a choice between fear and love? Comment below. I want to hear your story. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the cafe windows, casting a golden glow over the polished tables, and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. Leonard arrived first, heart pounding in anticipation, but this time it was different. There was no panic, no fear, just the quiet certainty that he was ready to finally bridge the gap between the man he had been and the person he wanted to become, with Michelle by his side. Michelle entered moments later, her presence radiant and calm. Leonard felt a familiar ache of emotion. Hope, relief, and longing, all mingling into one overwhelming sense of completeness. She smiled softly, the same smile that had first caught his attention weeks ago. And for a moment, all the past misunderstandings, heartbreaks, and fears seemed to melt away. "Good morning," she said gently, sliding into the seat across from him. "Are you ready for this?" Leonard reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I've been ready for this for a long time," he admitted, eyes locking with hers. "I just didn't know it until now." Michelle squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We've both been afraid," she whispered. "But fear doesn't get to define us anymore. We get to define us." They spoke quietly, sharing their hearts openly. Leonard recounted how his pride had always kept him isolated, how loss had hardened him, and how, through the chaos and vulnerability of the past weeks, he had realized that love was not a weakness. It was the courage to let someone in. Michelle shared her own truths, her fears of heartbreak, the lessons she had learned from trust lost, and the hope that had slowly grown despite caution and past disappointments. As they spoke, the weight of previous misunderstandings lifted, replaced by a deep, authentic connection forged in honesty and courage. After a moment of shared silence, Leonard leaned forward, his forehead resting lightly against hers. Michelle, he murmured, voice thick with emotion. I want this. I want us. No walls, no distance. Just you and me. Michelle closed her eyes, savoring the warmth and sincerity of his words. When she opened them again, she nodded, a soft, confident smile curving her lips. Yes, Leonard. Me too. I want this too. The cafe around them buzzed with the gentle rhythm of morning life, but for Leonard and Michelle, time seemed to pause. There was no fear, no hesitation, only the quiet certainty of connection, the realization that they had finally found each other amidst chaos, heartbreak, and chance. As they left the cafe together, hand in hand, the city around them felt alive and full of possibility. Leonard felt the weight of loneliness lift from his shoulders, replaced by the exhilaration of shared joy and the certainty that he was no longer walking alone. Michelle felt the same. A life that had once been cautious and guarded now felt open and full of hope, every step lighter because it was shared. Later, at a quiet park near the cafe, they paused. Leonard turned to Michelle, eyes shining. You know, the day you saved that tray, he said with a soft laugh. I never could have imagined it would lead to this. Michelle smiled, her fingers brushing his cheek. Neither could I, she admitted. But I'm glad it did. They embraced a long, tender hug that spoke of forgiveness, trust, and the promise of love. The past, the heartbreak, the fear, the misunderstandings, had shaped them, but it no longer controlled them. Together, they had found strength, hope, and the unexpected gift of love at last. As they walked through the city streets, hand in hand, their laughter mingled with the morning light, a testament to the journey they had endured and the connection they had chosen to nurture. For Leonard and Michelle, love was no longer a fleeting possibility. It was a living, breathing reality, forged through adversity and sealed with courage. And in that quiet triumph, one truth remained. Some encounters are meant to change everything, and sometimes, the most unexpected love is the one worth holding on to forever. Speech balloon, have you ever experienced love that surprised you, healed you, or changed you completely? Comment below. I want to hear your story. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story.